So enter Lucius' son, young Lucius, and Lavinia running after him. And young Lucius flies from her with his books under his arms. Enter Titus and Marcus.
Help, grandsire, help. My aunt Lavinia follows me everywhere. I know not why. Good Uncle Marcus, see how swift she comes. Alas, sweet aunt, I know not what you mean. I think it's also important to notice because she can't speak because of her tongue having been cut from her, she has to follow him around in desperation just for him to pay attention to her and try to communicate that she has something she needs to say.
Stand by me, Lucius. Do not fear thine aunt.
She loves thee, boy, too well to do thee harm.
Aye, when my father was in Rome, she did.
What means my niece Lavinia by these signs? And I think this word signs is really important to notice because it's showing how even without words, even without the ability to speak, Lavinia is desperate to communicate and desperate to be heard. She's still trying to make connection and trying to communicate through signs.
So how now, Lavinia? Marcus, what means this? Some book there is that she desires to see. Which is it, girl? Which is a girl of these? Open them, boy. Lucius, what book is that she tossed so?
Grandsire, 'tis Ovid's Metamorphoses. My mother gave it me. And I think this is also very important because we see that she's trying to communicate through stories and tales and words that were handed down from young Lucius' mother. The ancestors' words, these words that were handed down, are going to become their media to communicate.
Titus, soft, so busily she turns the leaves. Help her. What would she find? Lavinia, shall I read? This is the tragic tale of Philomel, and treats of Titus' treason and his rape. And rape, I fear, was root of thy annoy.
See, brother, see. Note how she quotes the leaves.
Okay, one sec. What are you seeing now on the screen?
Ends with root of thy annoy. I mean, I have it on my phone, but.
1 second, let me. Of course, we're having technical difficulty here. Okay. All right, so in the last thing was, see, brother, see, note how she quotes the leaves. Is that right?
Yes, I just read that, yes.
Okay, and so in our conversation about this, we were struck by what's meant by quotes. How do you perform that? How is she that is in the absence of a tongue, in the ability to speak, and the absence of hands, how is she quoting the leaves? So I think that's something that raises interesting performative questions for theater companies and film directors. Lavinia, wert thou thus surprised, sweet girl, ravished and wronged as Philomel was, forced in the ruthless, vast, and gloomy woods? See, aye, such a place there is where we did hunt. Oh, had we never hunted there, patterned by that poet here describes, by nature made for murders and for rapes. Give sign, again, there's that reference to sign. How is she giving sign? How is she supposed to give sign? Sweet girl, for here are none but friends. What Roman lord it was durst do the deed, or slunk not saturnine as Tarquin erst that left the camp to sin in Lucrece's bed. And that's another reference to an Ovidian tale, the rape of Lucrece. So it's their struggle to try to understand her through these classical stories.
Sit down, sweet niece. Brother, sit down by me. Apollo, Pallas, Jove, or Mercury, inspire me that I may this treason find. I think this is interesting to note, just like, sort of in a way that reflects on how Tamara appealed to godlike and religion. There's another appeal to gods for help to communicate, to have this treason, to understand what Lavinia is trying to say. My lord, look here, Lavinia. He writes his name with his staff and guides it with feet and mouth. This sand plot is plain. Guide, if thou canst, this after me. I have writ my name without the help of any hand at all. Cursed be that heart that forced us to this ship. I think we notice just how carefully and patiently he's trying to find a way for Lavinia to communicate, that he's trying to find this way for her to speak to them in the absence of her voice. Write thou, good niece, and here display at last what God will have discovered for revenge. Heaven guide thy pen to print thy sorrows plain, that we may know the traitors and the truth. Once again, we see this reference that heaven and God are required to have their pain and their sorrow made plain, even though sorrow and pain is never something simple and plain. It's complex, but I think they understand that because they see that they feel like they need God, outside help in heaven, to even express their pain. She takes the staff in her mouth and guides it with her stumps and writes, "Oh, do ye read, my lord, what she hath read?"
Now, I think it's really interesting to point out, to go back to something Leah said earlier about his crying in the dust, right? The failure to communicate reduces him to just crying in the dust. And now we have that, the desperate attempt for her to communicate her sorrow through writing in the sand, right? So there's in some ways the desperate insufficiency of the ability to communicate her sorrow. And I think that's suggested, I think, powerfully, as we discussed it before, in what she writes in Titus's reading of what she wrote. That is, strumpum, chiron, Demetrius. So defilement. So that it's interesting that it's written in Latin for us, but the translation is simply, plainly, defilement, chiron, Demetrius. And that struck us as, despite all of this effort for her to communicate her sorrow and her pain, that the most that we get is this bare, economical, inadequate result, this written product.
It just seems to raise this question: does she doesn't actually, can she successfully express her pain?
Right.
What the lustful sons of Tamra, performers of this heinous bloody deed? And it's just, I think, refers back that all we get from all their struggle to communicate is the actions. We get a pointing back to the doers of the pain, not any expression or any reference to her actual pain.
Right. And she is reduced, really objectified to an object.
To the
defilement, right? A defiled object. And then so finally we have Titus speaking in Latin. Interesting way that in this attempt to communicate across difference, that is her violation, but also communicating to the audience with a language that marks him as in some ways exclusive. So he speaks in Latin. I won't torture you with my attempt to speak Latin. I'll just read the translation. Ruler of the great heavens, are you so slow to hear and see crimes? And that takes us back to this appeal to God and the question about God and religion and communicating across the perceived and real differences, that is, of pain and privilege. There was at the end of our discussion of this, there was a question that Leah identified, or an issue that Leah identified, that I think led to, in some ways, what is the most important question for us to take up from the text and then to explore for ourselves. So Leah, if you want to share that.
So just like as we see how Lavinia ends up using the Ovid's metamorphoses and the staff to communicate, to what extent do we rely on all sorts of things, technology? What kind of media do we use? It could, for example, email, social media, text messaging, and what kind of ways do we use to communicate? And to what extent do these media shape what we say? And what's the extent do they limit what we say? Like we saw how Lavinia was limited and not able to express her pain. All she got was the 2 names and defilement. So is it possible for us to fully capture or express our emotions and our pain through media that we have handed down for us and these media that we use every day? Is it possible to communicate ourselves through these?
Right. So that in the media is represented in the text by the book and the staff. Right. So Shakespeare highlights that the clumsy insufficiency of that to capture emotion. So as Leah is saying, if we think about the media that we just accept and rely on as capturing the full range of our feelings and emotion, are we taking something for granted that we might benefit from questioning?